All right. Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. We're excited to have you here with us for this second conversation in our Data is Love series. I am so excited to have Sophie Wine with me today. She is the co-founder and CEO of Ariglad. Hi, Sophie. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Sophie, okay, so we met through another woman, entrepreneur, leader in STEM, and she told me your story about starting Ariglad, and it really caught me how you were thinking about the importance of data for CHROs. Will you tell us about the story of Ariglad and like how you arrived at the name and why you started this company?
Definitely. So the inspiration for Ariglad really started after I got a job right out of college at a tech startup. Very typical tech startup situation, beer pong tables and dogs kind of running around. But what ended up happening was that there was some mismanagement and culture issues, and there was a 30% walkout. So a huge portion of the company walked out almost at the same time. And that was definitely an intense way to start your workforce experience. And then my next job was in cybersecurity. So I was working with Fortune 1000 companies, CIOs, IT managers to identify and mitigate risk. So I basically put my two experiences together, and I wondered why there wasn't a similar software for people leaders and HR leaders for basically identifying and mitigating risk as well, the same way that cybersecurity can. So I started Ariglad initially as solely an anonymous reporting tool, just to kind of learn more about the industry. And we were able to meet our team, build our product, and get to about 10 customers in 10 months. And it was an amazing experience. And within those 10 months, we also started to see a trend of employees wanting to use our tool in some capacities just as a ticketing solution. So
Mm.
we started to build out that part of the solution and really focusing more on analytics and ticketing for large organizations.
Ooh,
And then
I love that.
and then of course I didn't mention the name part. So Ariglad, yeah, we were trying to find a name that really resonated with our goal. So I'm Danish, and there's a very special word in Denmark called arbejdsglad, which literally means happy at work, that you wake up every morning and you're so excited to go to the workplace. So we shortened that to Ariglad. And then once we, kind of chose a bee as our logo, just because we really saw bees as kind of a working, part in an organization working towards a common goal. My co-founder, who's Turkish, let us know that Ari means bee in Turkish. So it literally means be glad, which ended up being perfect for what we're doing.
I love all sorts of the wordplay, but also this idea of like happy to go to work, right? I think we're at a moment in time where so many people are not happy to go to work, right? Like we are in the third year of living through this global pandemic, and there are lots of changes that are happening in the world of work, right? Me personally, I love Mondays. Mondays are my favorite day of the week because I get up and I'm super excited to like do what I do. And I think that there are some ways in which your platform helps leaders make some decisions so that their workforce as well is happy to be there. And I'm curious, like in the last couple of years building Ariglad, has there been like this like one amazing aha moment with a client where some of the data that you were gathering from the ticketing platform drove some kind of action or created this like kind of insight for the client where they were like, oh yeah, there's a different or a better way of doing something?
Definitely. So we had one customer that was looking for a more real-time way to understand what their employees really cared about, and kind of any red flags that were occurring in particular for this customer. And they were very not suspicious, but they were wanted to make sure that any product that they brought in was really going to make a real difference, and it wasn't just going to kind of do the bare minimum in the background. So we actually did a trial period for this larger customer, and they were like, yeah, we'll give it a try for 3 months. We'll see what happens. in a week or two, they had gotten enough data that made a true difference in not only for the HR department and their understanding of what was going on in the workplace, but multiple members of the C-suite was also very involved because of the type of data that was coming up. And so it really showed the HR team that not only the tool was working, but also there was kind of this pent up, want from the employee side of wanting to talk to HR in a more, structured environment, wanting to, talk about, everything from, more like concerns, but also just kind of like general questions. And so it was really powerful to just see the response that the leadership team had at this company.
Oh, that's amazing. And in just 1 week, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
The
that
type of
that
data.
that says a lot about like how employees want to connect with HR. Like what like for companies that don't have like a really great ticketing system or like a structured, you said a structured way of connecting with HR, like what are companies doing now? What are you noticing? Like what's the pathway to find somebody and ask them questions or like make a complaint?
So there's a huge breadth of like ways to do that. We see some organizations that have thousands and thousands of employees, and they're literally, the HR team is just inserting questions into an Excel sheet, and then they just kind of like track what's going on in that Excel sheet to like get back to the employee, and that's a very manual process. A more common theme that we've seen, especially in the tech industry, is HR will take on a ticketing system that is used by another department. So maybe Jira, for example, that's often used by product departments. And it's one of those things where I think something that has really come up in the last couple of years, especially with COVID, is just the need for really quantifying what's going on in HR. And I
Mm.
think that that's something that's really lacking in any third party tool today, and really, for HR and for outside of HR. But for HR, it's so important. This isn't a ticket about a product feature. This isn't a ticket about a sales. This is a ticket that's really representing sentiment within your organization. It's so key to not only capture that, but to have that illustrated back to you so you can more easily consume it and you can more easily take action. And so yeah, I think we're definitely, the most common situations is like just manually tracking kind of questions through Google Docs or Excel, or using some kind of ticketing system that was created for another department.
I can't believe that people are using spreadsheets to track what's happening. That seems like cuckoo because we have so many amazing, like potential technology fixes. The other thing that I heard you say is like quantifying what's happening. And a lot of times there's this idea that like quantifying what people are thinking and feeling is really hard because it's like in the realm of like squishy, right? And it sounds like you're able to do that pretty well from your platform. When we were having a chat last week, you said to me that you're working on making sure that your platform is integrated with some of the HRIS or other systems so that you can collect demographic information, right? Like race, gender, etc. Why is that important? Why not have a totally anonymous, confidential platform?
Yeah, so we have basically both abilities. So we have the ability for an employee to create an anonymous ticket. And in that case, nothing is being collected. It's completely anonymous. They can, withhold all the information they want to. And so that's really important for like, yeah, sure. Immediately you think about the most intense leadership problems or something that's going on. But we've also seen anonymous reporting come up when you have like infertility benefit questions of like, where are they? And, you may not feel comfortable coming out and asking that. So we definitely wanted to integrate that into our system, but really what we focus on is the non-anonymous. So like you said, the ability to create tickets, and then for us to integrate with HRIS systems like a Workday, where we can understand not only the content of the ticket, but where are you in the world? What department are you from? What's your race? What's your gender, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really important because essentially what that does is it narrows down what can be done for emerging trends. So for example, if we
Mm.
say okay, so there's a trend in your sales team where everyone is, beginning to be really unhappy with compensation. That's like a trend that we're seeing, kind of XYZ. What makes that more valuable is if you can really narrow down, okay, we're actually seeing a lot of, white women in New York are really upset about compensation in your sales team. And then you can start to wonder, okay, well, why is that? Can we look at maybe demographics of, is there a pay disparity between them and another demographic or what have you? And so it just allows you to quantify even more the problem and take action. Because I think something that's lacking a lot in HR data as a whole is what to do with it. You have all of this information, you have all this survey information, and I think it's so important to know who and the demographic behind those statements and that data, because you really want to do something to help them at the end of the day. That's HR's job, and they want to. And so what we really want to do is direct them and provide as much information as possible to say, hey, this is who is actually saying this information and providing this information, and this is how you could potentially help them.
Right. So what you're saying is that HR and DEI leaders really need to be honed in on specific parts of their companies and address the really specific challenges that people are having rather than generalizing the solution. Right. So that said, I'm really curious, like, in your experience of working with your clients, is there ever a point where folks are like overwhelmed or inundated with data?
Yeah, I mean, I think organizations definitely need to be prepared for that. We definitely kind of work with our leaders to understand, what their goals are for implementing a tool like this, what their challenges have been so far. And I think it's definitely one of those things where once you implement Ariglad, because our emphasis is also on user experience and we integrate with like Slack and Teams and wanting to take on those existing habits of employees before pulling it into the greater Ariglad platform, there is a very high usage rate. Like I mentioned, within a week, we were starting to see traction in some organizations. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely important to, when you're kind of managing those expectations of this is not one of those tools potentially that's going to take a year, and then you're going to have some data, like you're going to get data pretty fast, and then what are we going to do with that data? Who's going to be taking care of that data? And so I think the one way that we really manage that is by essentially sending pieces of information to different levels of HR. So for example, if you have like benefit questions, you can send all of your benefit questions to this HR, team. And so they are going to be the ones that all take care of the benefit questions. And so it suddenly becomes a lot more manageable. So it's not just like everyone is kind of a free for all of all of this data that's coming through. It's all kind of organized, and you can see the data organized in those capacities. You can see the tickets coming through there, who's assigned to which ticket. And so we work with the HR team as a whole, and we really have a stringent change management process as well, just to implement it with the team, do the diligent training, and making sure that everyone's on the same page with who's going to be responsible for what. So that's very, very important for our onboarding.
Oh, I love that. I love that you're doing the onboarding and the due diligence and the training so everybody feels really comfortable. Something that I heard you say earlier, and it's been a long time since I've worked for anybody else, but in my memory of like working in a larger company or even mid-sized companies, I always thought like that HR's role was in sort of fielding complaints, big complaints, little complaints, discrimination, like little acts of exclusion. And earlier I heard you say, you gave an example of like someone asking about like fertility benefits. So that doesn't sound like I'm like I have a complaint. It sounds like I'm really curious about some little tidbit of information. Why focus this broadly, right? Like why capture data about questions around benefits, and like what else are people inputting through the platform?
Definitely. I think, it's interesting because we did a lot of research over this. So when you're moving from our anonymous reporting tool to a greater ticketing tool, over the summer of 2021, we did a ton of research into this space. And it was really interesting because we were speaking to some HR managers at larger organizations that were spending 80% of their time responding to employee questions, just responding to where are my dental benefits, how much PTO do I have, and just like these constant barrage of these questions. And we found that this was actually one of the main ways that HR spends their time, is just responding to these kinds of questions. And I think employee expectations have been rising as well, especially again in the tech sector. There's this kind of expectation of, it's kind of like an internal customer service of, you have questions and you want accurate information quickly. And as those expectations have been rising, the pressure has been rising for HR to deliver the right information quickly. And so at the same time, when we were speaking to leaders, they were expressing frustration with, they have all these goals and they have all these expectations from the CEO to deliver strategic initiatives like hybrid work or DEI, what have you. And everyone was too busy, basically, working on, replying to employee questions. And so basically, we really worked on understanding that problem that really was a lot more broad. And I think B, it's just one of those fascinating situations where the ticketing is showing you that real-time data. This isn't a survey that you kind of get in and then you process for a few months, and then about 6 months, a year down the road, you kind of have this data that you can present. It's like, this is what's happening today. This is what happened this week. This is what happened this quarter. This is what's important to people. Yeah, you have kind of a wide variety of types of questions that can come through. And so it's just really interesting to see what's coming through and how HR can respond more quickly to it because of the data that we're collecting for them. And, really just kind of, our goal is to free up their time so they can focus on more important initiatives.
I love that. Free up your time. Okay. So I have like sort of one last question for you. I know that there are lots of people watching today who are asking themselves, well, like, can I budget for or roll out a platform like Ariglad? And they're in their mind thinking probably not today, and maybe not for the next 6 months or a year, right? Because of, this, right? Like how hard it can be to get budget for these kinds of things, especially for HR and DEI leaders. Yeah, what are things that people can do today, right? Like, what are like tips that you have for them today, like guidance as they're getting started and as they're thinking about having some like real-time tracking of employee concerns, needs, issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think ultimately everyone has figured out, everyone's doing something at the moment. There's no organization that's not doing anything, because you can't not do anything for it. I think my biggest recommendation would be to have some kind of tracking system. So for some of our organizations, we're actually inputting their existing tickets from, months or years ago, and then having an understanding, like a benchmark of like, okay, this is where we're starting. And then now we can see, as we use the Ariglad tool, what happens from now on. So I would say having some kind of tracking system, whether it's an Excel sheet or whether it's another, system, just tracking the types of questions that are coming through. And also, if you do find yourself in a situation where you do need to quantify data in a way that's not anecdotal, you will have some form of data that you can look to and say, okay, we have seen, generally an increase of tickets about paternity leave this quarter or what have you. Yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest recommendation, is just some form of tracking, because right now it is so heavily focused on just anecdotal evidence of kind of everyone has their own perspective of like how they think things are going and the things that they've seen. You just want to unify that and understand what is the department seeing as a whole.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so would you recommend that, like, if a company or a team has no solution in place now, like Google Forms, SurveyMonkey?
Yeah, I mean, Google Forms works. I mean, I would say those are hard though, because you can't respond. So an employee would submit it and then you can't reply to them. So it's more usually for like anonymous reporting. So anonymous reporting could potentially work, but then you can never reply to them. I mean, if you really want to, implement a tool like this, we are at the beginning stages of implementing our tool into the wild after we've, developed this additional feature set. So I would say, explore Ariglad. We are working with a couple of different customers and more cost-effective solutions, because there really isn't, when we are having this question fielded to us, there isn't really a clear answer of like, this is what you can do that's kind of just the same. But yeah, I would say SurveyMonkey or Google Forms is great for like anonymous questions if that's your focus. But if you're more focused on capturing that day-to-day data that you're getting through Slack or email or Teams, yeah, really manually putting it into a ticketing system or an Excel sheet is kind of your best bet to get that data.
Okay, so I have one last question for you, which is like, what's important for like a small team or a small company to focus on, right? If they're in early stages, let's say like someone's maybe 50 employees, or they're like a small nonprofit organization,
Mhm.
versus like when you're into the few hundreds, right? Because the thing about data is that you need a little bit of it, right? Actually, you need quite a bit of it to see some really interesting trends. And so, yeah, like what are some best practices for like smaller companies versus bigger companies as they are getting started?
Yeah, I would say, to be honest, having a specific, it kind of gets back to, who's in charge of what. I think something that a lot of organizations, and this is for smaller ones too, struggle with is employees knowing who to go to for their questions. And so whether that's HR questions or onboarding questions or what have you, I would say having just a very transparent chain of command of, this is who's important, or this is who's in charge of, employment relation questions. This is who's in charge of benefit questions. So you can get that data, and you can also create that culture of transparency and trust with your employees. So when you get to the point where you do need a ticketing system, everyone's going to already be in the habit of sharing their questions, sharing their concerns, or what have you. And I would say just like, yeah, inputting that data right away, so you have that benchmark. So if you're seeing, if you're at 15 employees and you have a fantastic culture, feel like you all get along really well, and you have this benchmark of these are the types of questions we're getting, and then maybe you hire another 10, 15, 30 people, and then you start to see the data going into a different direction. It's really important to be able to track that. It's important to be able to see those potential yellow flags or potential green flags of, everything's going really well. We can kind of validate that everything is on track, or it's potentially not. So I think just tracking the data while fostering a culture of transparency and openness is probably the things I would recommend most.
Oh, I love that. There's a comment in the chat that I want to highlight, and it's from Jaconda, and she says, HR also needs to make sure they're asking the right questions and understand what to do with the data. And this is where, as somebody who wears the DE&I hat often, I have to say that like this is the reason we need to start diversifying our teams and organizations, because different people look at data differently. They come with different lived experiences and professional experiences, which ultimately means that they have lots of different contexts, right? And I'm just gonna say that, like, in addition to an amazing ticketing system that offers real-time insights, we also need practitioners that look like the companies. Um, Otherwise, they're not going to have the right context with which to make sense of all of this amazing data. Um,
Absolutely.
right? Sophie, are
Yeah.
you noticing that? Are you noticing like trends and just like demographics of HR departments and
I mean,
companies at large?
I think I'm just speaking from like a wider lens of like, I think we're all aware of the, excitement of AI data and the risks of AI data. And, when you put data into the hands of one specific demographic, you're only going to get one perspective, and you're only going to get one reaction,
Mm.
and it's not going to be very helpful and effective for the organization. And so absolutely, the people that are taking on that data and that are reacting to that data, they need to reflect the demographics you have in your organization as a whole. So it becomes that much more important that your DEI initiatives are actually, reflecting where you want your company to be.
Yeah. All right. So we have some ways to go in making that reality. I know that right now, HR and even DEI teams are predominantly white, as our workforce is getting more and more diverse, right? Sophie, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Monday morning and sharing your thoughts on how we start to get better insights and use data to make better decisions. Any sort of parting words or comments for people that have been watching today?
Yeah, I would just say, everyone is doing HR is moving a million miles a minute at the moment. I like to say that HR today is what the finance industry was in 2008. Everyone's kind of looking to them to tell us, what's next here. And so I would definitely say, just like we kind of talked about just at the end of this session of matching innovative tech with the DEI practices that need to be happening is just so important to make sure that we're making the type of, leaps and bounds that we want to see in every industry. It's just so important. And I do see that topic be not talked about enough. And I think it just needs to be really hammered home every chance we can possibly get, because it's just so key. And you can have all the data in the world, but if you don't have the proper ways to implement it in a way that's best for the whole organization, it's not going to make much of a difference.
Okay. On that note, thank you. Thanks for being with us today. Next week, we are gonna talk about gender parity specifically. So I hope that folks that are watching today will join us again next week on Monday. Sophie, thank you. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.